Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are live on the internet right here from Books and Books in Coral Gables, with thanks to the Knight Foundation for their generous support. Just a reminder to our internet audience, if at any time during tonight's presentation you'd like to order a copy of tonight's book, you can do so. We'll get it signed. Call us on the number that's on your screen. We'll get one signed and shipped to you for free of charge for the shipping anywhere here in the U.S. And for those of you here, while you are silencing your cell phones, don't forget to check out our Books and Books website, booksandbooks.com. You can go there, give us your email address, and check out all the events that are there. The upcoming events for the month. We present an average of 60 events every month, sometimes 4 a night, and we usually have something for everyone. We have Spanish events, we have kids events, we have poetry readings, first-time authors, and celebrity signings. When you visit our site, as I say, don't forget to give us your email so we can keep you apprised of everything that goes on here so you won't miss anything. And also don't forget to visit our newest Books and Books location. We are now down at the Adrienne Arch Center in the historic Sears Tower. A great place to go and visit on any night. Of course, when you're not here, you can be there and vice versa. They got a full bar, nice cafe, beautiful bookstore. It's well worth the visit. But tonight we're very happy to have with us Barbara Bonner and her new book, Inspire Generosity. Here to give her the introduction is the founder of Budapest. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Gabriel Riera.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be with you here tonight, and I'm really, really happy to introduce my friend Barbara Bonner. Barbara has spent her professional life devoted to nonprofit management, fundraising, and philanthropy. In New York, she held leadership positions in 3 of the city's distinguished museums. She then served as vice president of Bennington College and of the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. For many years, she has had her own consulting practice that helps nonprofit organizations reach new levels of thriving. In addition, Barbara has held leadership positions on 10 nonprofit boards and is currently the board chair at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. 4 years ago, she started a fund for women with cancer in her region. And after 30 years in New York City, Barbara now lives in the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts. Her book, Inspiring Generosity, is really a wonderful collection of stories and thoughts and fragments of words and inspiration that has sort of opened the door for people to live a more generous life. And, you know, I met Barbara a couple of years ago. She met me at Budapest, and we had her as a presenter as well. And it really came at an amazing time in my life, because until I met Barbara, I had thought of generosity as just, you know, generosity. You give something to someone, you don't hold back. But after really talking with Barbara and experiencing this spiritual approach to generosity, I realized that it's about so much more. It's about living with a generous spirit. It's about opening to life in a different way. It's about seeing so much of what you do as a person, how you think and how you live in a different light. And my friendship with Barbara came at a time when I was facing some difficult situations in my life, and at every step of the way, I kept thinking, be generous. Be generous with this person. Be generous with your thinking. Be generous and don't hold back. Don't let fear rule. Let generosity rule. And so I'm really grateful to have learned these lessons. And I'm very happy to present to you Barbara, who will talk to us for about 15 to 20 minutes and then open it up for questions from you. Barbara Bonner.
Good evening. Well, you've just witnessed a really fantastic act of generosity in that I don't know how many of you have friends who would come out the night before their wedding to introduce you at a bookstore, but that is in fact what Gabriel just did, and I'm so deeply moved by that. And we'll drink a toast to you afterwards, or very soon maybe. So I guess I hate it when people start with apologies, but I will start with one because of the weather that I brought you from Massachusetts. When I left on Monday morning, it was, in fact, 11 below at the airport, and I'm afraid I'm to blame. It's sort of amazing, isn't it? And I thought I'd also left a place where people want to talk about the weather all the time, but I hadn't. My book came out exactly a year ago this week, and I can't tell you what a joy it's been traveling around the country talking about the subject of generosity. What still astonishes me is that it has actually taken a year to come to Florida. So I'm working on a second book, and we'll start that one in Florida because it certainly is lovely here. I don't care what the temperature is. My goodness, what a great town you all live in. I'm truly envious. I love audiences who want to come and hear about this subject. I think that you really are a self-selecting group, and you're wonderful to talk to. I think that audiences who come out really tend to have very warm and open hearts and genuinely want to make a difference in the world in some way, whether just for themselves or their families, their communities, or the world at large. I could be biased by this subject, but that has been my experience, so I thank you for bringing your warm and open hearts here this evening. I will speak for just 15 or 20 minutes, and then my favorite part is questions. And that'll be fun to do, and I'll take any questions you like. I'm going to start by saying that this is not a treatise about generosity. If there are fundraisers in the audience, I'm probably not going to make you a better fundraiser. But it is one woman's journey in really immersing myself in the subject. If you haven't seen the book itself yet, let me just tell you very briefly what it is. It's my offering of inspirations on the subject of generosity. It consists of 30 poems that I love that have generosity as their central theme, from Hafiz and Shakespeare to Molly Peacock and Wendell Berry. I offer 100 quotations that I love on the subject. Serious, funny, quirky, from contemporary thinkers and from the world's great religions. And finally, from the many hundreds and hundreds of stories that I've received about people whose lives have been struck by sort of an aha moment of generosity, much like what Gabriel described. I describe it in the book as sort of being hit by a lightning bolt of generosity. I selected 14 and wrote about them. So all of these elements, stories, quotations, and poems, are interwoven into a book of inspirations that I hope, and it has proven to be true, that people will keep on their bedside tables and coffee tables and meditation cushions. And mostly, and this has come true, my wish was for people to buy it as a gift for the generous people who light up their lives. And that's been really the great pleasure in seeing who buys this book. Well, people ask me why I wrote this book. I was sort of minding my own business, working in nonprofits all my life. My motivations were very clear from the beginning. I really believe in the power of inspiration, and I believe that true generosity is powerfully inspiring. Secondly, I wanted to expand our understanding of generosity, just as Gabriel alluded to far more than just giving money and material goods, into what it really, something much more meaningful. What really interests me the most about the subject is what it means to live a generous life. And thirdly, I wanted to elevate our current conversation From contemporary culture's interest in the activities of our philanthropic billionaires to what generosity really looks like on the ground in everyday lives, what it is, what it isn't, how it manifests, and mostly how it changes lives. My experience is that generosity can so often arrive in a life just in a flash, something we hear or overhear or witness or read. And so my goal was to bring together a collection of those moments. And I wanted it to be beautiful, and I wanted it to cost less than $20. I think it is beautiful. You'll have to be the judge of that, and we were able to come in at $19.95. So a lot of people really did have access to it, and that was always really important to me. People usually like me to start with, what is generosity? I think we all have something to give, whether it's our caring and caretaking, time, encouragement, or material gifts of all kinds. But all giving doesn't really measure up to my definition of generosity. We can, after all, give hoping to receive acclaim for our gift. We can give to create a certain outcome that will benefit us personally. We can give to be in the company of people who will be impressed by our ability to give. And we can give from a generous place in our hearts that propels us forward to provide what's needed without concern for applause and recognition. I believe that generosity invites us to put ourselves in another's shoes, to see and feel the existence of a pressing need, and to simply move forward in whatever way we can. What I call the generous angels, and I've been lucky to have a lot of them in my life. I hope you all have too. Really just step forward and say, how can I help? How much do you need? And how can we work together to change things? I start the book with one of my favorite short poems from the 14th century Persian poet Hafiz, which I bet you half this audience probably knows. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky. So as you can see, I really believe that generosity is a quality that can change the world. Unlike its close cousin, compassion, generosity requires action. To be a generous person, you must act. You can't just think about it. In many ways, I think generosity is compassion in action. It's certainly love in action. And it's no surprise then that it's really at the center of all the world's religions. Generosity is also a practice. As with anything we practice, we get better at it over time. I really believe it's like a muscle, it needs exercise. And I've found that being generous obviously changes the lives of the beneficiaries, but my experience is that it actually changes the lives of the generous people in quite remarkable ways. I believe it can be revolutionary. It is certainly contagious. Generosity gives us a sense of connectedness. It breaks apart our sense of isolation that is so widespread in contemporary culture. As Dr. King said, we are all part of an inescapable network of mutuality. And I love the wisdom of the poet John O'Donohue, who says, a generous heart is never lonesome. A generous heart has luck. The lonesomeness of contemporary life is partly due to the failure of generosity. We also need to feel a degree of gratitude. in order to act generously. And there are two quotes in the book that I especially love that illustrate this point about gratitude. The first is from Sally Jaco Tisdale. "Once I was young, poor, and generous. Now I have a house, a car, and a savings account, and I'm not so generous." Gratitude, the simple and profound feeling of being thankful, is the foundation of all generosity. I'm generous when I believe that right now, right here in this place and form, I'm being given what I need. Generosity requires that we relinquish something, and this is impossible if we're not glad for what we have. Otherwise, the giving hand closes into a fist and won't let go. And this for Gabriel, from Buddhist teacher Gelek Rinpoche, whom I actually met because of you last June. When you're practicing generosity, you should feel a little pinch when you give something away. That pinch is your stinginess protesting. In giving away the old worn-out coat you wouldn't be caught dead wearing again, it's not generosity. There's no pinch. You're just cleaning out your closet and calling it something else. And I have to say, I'm still for giving the coat away. I'm just for calling it what it is. People have asked me what I've learned in this path of kind of immersion in this wonderful subject. And there are three things that stand out that I think might be of interest to you tonight. The first is that there is some really very impressive scientific research going on now around the country in universities that points to altruism being an inborn human quality, observable even in young babies. Stanford, Berkeley, and Stony Brook all have centers studying generosity. At Notre Dame, there's a discrete division called the Science of Generosity, which turns out enormous numbers of very impressive papers. When I started research for the book, I was lucky enough to be invited to a small conference in Zurich hosted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on the subject of generosity. And it consisted of neuroscientists, economists, and Buddhist teachers. You can imagine how interesting those conversations were. And because His Holiness was the host, also just a tremendous amount of fun. He has many wonderful qualities, but fun is really one of the great ones. In the final days of creating this book, I was in New York on the subway going downtown. I imagine most of you have had that experience and probably have shared this experience. And a man got onto the subway car who announced that he was a military veteran. He lives in the New York City shelters, homeless, has no money, and is hungry. He implored my fellow passengers for help, adding very poignantly, "Don't be embarrassed to help me." Many of us have had similar experiences, and usually, at least in New York subways, people either look at the floor or look away. Not so that day. A number of people immediately reached for wallets and purses, and one woman who had just come from the grocery handed him her bag of groceries. The lessons of this book were so deep in my bones that I really didn't hesitate for a second. I take no credit for that. It simply happened. As I was on my way to an ATM, I had practically nothing in my purse, but as I put what I did have in his bag, I said I was sorry I couldn't do more. And he looked me in the eyes with great tenderness and sweetness and said, "It's not how much you give me, it's that you opened your heart to me." well, it took my breath away, and I really thought there it was, all the lessons of this book, which I just created really in the words and eyes of one man I simply will never forget. So 3, and finally, I've learned a lot of the unexpected ways that generosity shows up in our lives in ways that we aren't used to calling them generosity. And this is kind of an ongoing list I'm fooling around with, and so I'd like to try just a few of these out on you and see if you agree that they are every bit as generous as giving away money or that old coat. Giving the benefit of the doubt, not holding a grudge, forgiveness, going the extra mile, giving to a charity in the name of someone who has wronged you, giving yourself whatever you need to recharge your batteries, collaboration over competition, not grabbing the credit, standing up for those without strong voices, true public service in our elected officials. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Staying open to new ideas. And I believe that generosity also lies at the heart of many of the world's greatest activists. How can we call the work and lives of Aung San Suu Kyi or Dr. King or Gandhi anything but incredibly generous? Certainly lives of courage and conscience, but I think that generosity for others was really the driving engine in those lives. And so too many of the anonymous lives all around us every day, and those people that I salute in the book. I'd like to close with a few of my favorite short quotations from the book that I think you'll enjoy. And being in Miami, I have to start with one from Jose Marti. Happiness exists on earth, and it is won through prudent exercise of reason, knowledge, and the harmony of the universe, and constant practice of generosity. Thornton Wilder, money is like manure. It's not worth a thing unless it's spread around encouraging young things to grow. Maya Angelou, I've learned that you shouldn't go through life with a catcher's mitt on both hands. You need to be able to throw something back. Samuel Johnson, the true measure of a man is how he treats someone who can do him absolutely no good. Betty Reese, if you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been in bed with a mosquito. Seneca, he who gives when he's asked has waited too long. Henry Ford, the highest use of capital is not to make more money, but to make money do more for the betterment of life. I should add parenthetically that I got actually a fan letter from Henry Ford's great-grandson who had been given the book and was touched that I included that quotation. You never know. Andrew Carnegie, it's more difficult to give money away intelligently than it is to earn it in the first place. You all know this one. Winston Churchill, we make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. Mother Teresa, if you can't feed 100 people, then just feed one. And I love Peyton Conway March. There's a wonderful mythical law of nature that the three things we crave most in life, happiness, freedom, and peace of mind, are always attained by giving them to someone else. And one of my favorites, with which I start the book, from that great philosopher of the 20th century, Oscar Hammerstein. I will not sing it. From the Broadway version of The Sound of Music, not in the movie. A bell is no bell till you ring it. A song is no song till you sing it. And love in your heart wasn't put there to stay. Love isn't love till you give it away. Thank you very much. So I'd be happy to enter into conversation or answer questions or whatever that you have on your mind. Anybody like to?
Yeah,
You
from
look
a
like you
sort of mindfulness perspective, what is it, do you think, that goes on within people that stops them from being more compassionate and generous?
It's such a huge question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I guess I would have to say, from a mindfulness perspective, never give up on anyone. Because as I found in all the stories that I read, people can go through very closed, what you would call selfish, unmindful lives. And even at an advanced age, something will happen that will arrive and will open them up. I think mindfulness practice is one of those things that will. Quite often, I think the answer is really, really unhappy childhood situations in which, or fear-based situations that we just need to be so closed. Yeah, but there is, one thing the book really has taught me is to not give up on people. So something happens and the door swings open.
Yeah, I'm just curious, from your perspective, you haven't given a lot of thought and time to it. What have you seen as if there is any commonality between people who close off rather than be generous and compassionate?
Well, as I say, I think probably the main reason is very unhappy childhood situations. If you feel safe and loved as you grow up, you are going to be a more open person and be open to those experiences. Yeah. I'm not an authority on that question, but I love that question because it is so related to mindfulness practice, I think. Yeah.
Well, a comment down when you were throwing out examples. Just the thought is highlighting, they don't stick in my mind, but when you're talking about the politicians and such, to me that's stepping up to that's going from a deficit to even.
Right, right.
They're stepping up to honesty, obligation, whatever you might call it. So I don't consider that generous, even though it might be a struggle for them.
Well, I think it would take a leap of generosity for a number of the politicians in our world now to actually embrace the fact that they were elected to go into public service, that it was public service after all.
Morality or awakening of some kind.
Yeah, they can still make the wrong decisions. That's okay. I just want them to make them for the benefit of others. Yeah.
One question. Don't you think that 9/11 brought this new mindset about giving? Because I'm involved with a nonprofit myself, and I have noticed the difference before and after 9/11.
Yes.
And I don't know whether it was just a calling for a lot of people, that we thought that we were not vulnerable, and now we know we're vulnerable, and what are we doing with our lives?
Yes.
So I think people are more generous. What do you think about that?
I think there was a sense of we're all in it together. And I think that people realized that it's actually pretty easy to make a difference in other people's lives, to step forward in some way, and exactly what a difference it made. I mean, there were people doing such extraordinary things, and that spirit lives on. You know, as I looked at, for instance, the footage of the bombing of the marathon bombing. The number of people who, without thinking about it, ran into the site when the bomb went off instead of fleeing. That is generosity that is just nobody. There's no time for thought. It just was called up from a much deeper place. So, yeah, I think you're right. 9/11 didn't have enough of effect. It always has an effect for a brief period of
What
time.
about social media? That's another one that has triggered a lot of generosity, I believe.
Well, I think it's made people aware of how easy it is to make a donation. Social media, I'm not much of an expert. I think by and large, it's double-edged. It can make us very self-involved. And it can also make us very aware of all the causes and the needs in the world and be able to respond. But boy, we should do a lot of thinking about ourselves on social media, I think, and how do I look and how's it all being portrayed. And I sound like an old curmudgeon, I'm sorry.
Could you comment on generosity that, I don't want to use the term self-promoting, but like, so when people give and they give in their own name, and how do you view that? I mean, do you view that as, as somebody who's in a nonprofit, I'm happy to have the donation however it comes, or
Right.
the generosity. But how do you view that? Because a lot of what you've talked about is this selfless giving.
That's right. Well, as speaking as someone who has raised money all her life, I've sort of encountered them all at this stage, I think. I definitely am very partial to anonymous givers, but not everybody is. And it's important, almost all gifts are really important. And a lot of people need or want to be acknowledged for their gift, and so we learn how to do that. I think probably fundraising is becoming a little bit too formulaic in this time right now, so that it's a relationship of exchange. You give me X number of dollars, I put your name in this size font or your name on the building. We do that because it works and it helps organizations, but it is a relationship of exchange, and I think that we can still honor those donors who want acknowledgement, but maybe we could get better at telling the stories of the school teacher who stuffed it under her mattress for 50 years and then sent 10 kids to college, or the other stories that are anonymous. We have to do both. I mean, it's the real world, and organizations need money, and nonprofits struggle all the time. But I'd like to see a little bit more emphasis on, making a...
Do you ever try to guide donors in let's say in making it more than it is? I mean, in some ways, when people put their family name on it, they're thinking of their parents or something of that nature. Do you ever try to add depth to it?
I think quite often, and this is a wonderful reason to not be an anonymous donor, it can be tremendous incentive for people to see that someone has stepped forward generously, someone they admire, someone in the community who's important, and that can really matter. I try to, when I work with donors, understand the impact that they want to have in the world, what they're interested in changing. It really isn't about the money. It's what moves them and what they want to make happen. And that's the joy of fundraising. That's why you put up with the people who are worried about the size font, because so many wonderful things can happen in a world where there are people who do want to change things. Are there any fundraisers in the room? One. Bravo. Is that your experience? Do we see it somewhat similarly?
Yeah, they expect each fundraiser culture has different. I mean, each donor has a different expectation. You know, and I think the key is to listen.
Right. Right.
You have nothing else to say. They already know why you're there.
Right.
So basically, you listen to what the real feelings come out and to see what they really want to get out of it. So I direct the Children's Foundation.
Oh, how wonderful.
It's called Miami All Stars.
Uh-huh.
And we provide services to underprivileged kids in Miami in education, sports, fitness, and nutrition.
That's great. I think when you say listen, what we're actually doing is listening for the generosity. It's a world in which we're taught, as fundraisers, to grab the microphone and make the speech and have your elevator speech down and talk. And what you're really trying to do is understand. You're there to help. You're there to facilitate what someone wants to have happen in the world. And I think you're right, listening is the key to it, and of course mindful listening.
Barbara, one of the things I was really struck by when I read your book was the stories about generosity. Many of them had these unusual and almost ironic or unexpected outcomes, where the person giving often at the beginning, had little to give, but for whatever spiritual reason found it necessary to do so, and then having given, riches came their way in a sense, of various kinds. And I'm wondering about that because I think that there's a funny human quality that we sometimes always stumble over, which is, sort of the more you go after something, the less likely you are to get it sometimes. The more you pursue. And I was just wondering about that irony that you encountered when you were writing those stories and talking to people. Is that something? What is that? What is that?
Well, there's a wonderful new book by a man named Adam Grant. I don't know if many of you have seen it, called Give and Take. And in a nutshell, Adam's thesis is, he's a professor at Wharton, that it is generous people who become successful and not the other way around. We're entirely used to thinking of it the other way in our culture. So, a lot of it is, it's a great pleasure. It is a great pleasure to be generous. It frees something up in you. And, some of the scientific research actually shows when you put people under an fMRI and watch what centers light up when they are thinking about a generous act, it's the same centers as sex and food and comfort. Kind of astonishing. So, it's almost as if once the door is swung open, it tends to stay open because it is, it's so profoundly pleasurable and opens up a different life.
But is there? I mean, in your work, in doing these interviews and talking to all these people, did you come away with a prescription, in a sense? I mean, would you suggest to somebody, start giving? Or I don't know exactly what I'm saying.
Right. Well, I think the people in the book, it was, for many of them, it was really almost serendipitous. Something happened in their lives. So it was just something sort of flew in out of the window, and life became different. And they were moved to look at themselves differently as regards generosity. And then that feeds on itself, and that, of course, changes life. Yeah. Yeah, the stories were wonderful. What amazing people, really. Mm-hmm.
What moves us to generosity?
What moves us to generosity?
What have you found in your research that it's what ignites it? What's the spark? Because earlier you were talking about something deeper within us. So I wonder what if you could talk a little bit more.
Well, I think it is. It's so different for so many people. I think the early childhood experiments are really fascinating. I mean, of course, it's that generosity can be an inborn human trait. It can get papered over pretty young too, with a lot of unhappy experiences. I think there are a lot of different reasons. I do think that as adults who are lucky enough to enter into some form of mindfulness practice, that door can swing open pretty easily. But it's because you become outer directed. You're not so lost in just yourself. So, I mean, it's very simple. Actually loving people, it just opens you up. Suddenly you want to make other people happy. You realize how wonderful it feels to make other people happy. And as your means are available to you, you as the author said, loosen that fist. Not because somebody's prying it open, but because it feels good to do that.
Is it okay that it feels good?
What are you, a Puritan?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe like true selfishness. Are you doing it because it feels good? I've always wondered about that. Like I try to. I mean, it's a silly question, but there's a part of me that always wonders, hey, be careful, don't be feeling too good about this, because it becomes about you and not about the person that you're being generous with, But this brings me back to being generous with yourself also, which you mentioned earlier, is, what is that back and forth about? Is it as much of service to you as it is to the person that you give to, and is that fine? Is that okay?
We have to take care of ourselves, otherwise it's pretty impossible. I mean, if you're really feeling downtrodden and unhappy, and as Sally says, she can only feel grateful when she has something to give. It's a very tough question, Gabriel. Yeah, what do you think?
I think it's okay to feel good.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't even take on. Yes, of course it's good to...
I think it's healthy to question it. I think it's healthy to sort of, want to give, and maybe this is where anonymous donors are perhaps more enlightened, because they're really giving without wanting that recognition back, and it really becomes about the cause or the person they're supporting.
Well, sometimes they just don't want to get
more
requests. Sure, it's fine to make it feel good, but I think one of the things that I do try to touch on is just be aware of our motivations. That's all. Of course, it's wonderful to feel good in being able to make a generous gift or to make someone's life happier. There's a wonderful quote by Bob Thurman in the book about, just don't go into bankruptcy in this. You really have to think carefully about what you do, and just because you are moved to act generously, don't give it all away. Think carefully, and just be aware of motivation, I would say.
I think also from what you just said about the MRIs, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Feeling
it's a
good.
Trait to feel good is.
Isn't it great that feeling good is unavoidable?
Yeah. But you're right. You do need to look. I agree. Keep in check, like you said. While you're doing it. But I think that it's one of the reasons people give. There's a need. So, it's wonderful.
You're such a terrific audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. And don't ever apologize for bringing cold weather. It's usually too miserable here, so some of us appreciate the weather. For those of you watching online, you still have time to give us a call there at the store. We'll get a book autographed for you and ship it to you, as I said earlier. And for those of you here, anyone feeling generous and support your local bookstore, you can do that as well. We have the books for sale behind the counter. Barbara will sit right here and sign them for you. So thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.